But yeah, so what we're going to be going through today is going to be, I have the title right here, is Jesus man or myth? And I know a lot of people, when they think about, when they question, well, what do you mean a myth? And I was kind of talking about that with my brother earlier, that, there's a few movies that are out that kind of disprove the whole historicity of Jesus. And they use other deities that have lived long before. And they say, you know what, well, he's just like a copycat savior, or he's just copying all these other religions. And all the disciples just kind of brought all these things all together and created the whole story of Jesus out of it. So that is, I've also seen as a growing thing on YouTube right now, with all these atheists that are coming out. There's a lot of new atheists that are coming out with huge channels, and a lot of them kind of hold the same view that Jesus never existed and that he's just a myth. But when you really look into all the details of it, you really got to ask yourself, is that even true? So we're going to kind of go through a few of them and see, is that true or not? One of the most popular ones, that the most popular myths out right now, which I think is one of the best examples that somebody can give, is one that Bart Ehrman gives, which Bart Ehrman, I've talked about it before, which is a famous atheist, but he's also a professor. So in his class, he'll start his class with this story that I'll share with you guys. So he'll start off the story saying, let me tell you a story of a man. This man, before he was born, his mother had a visitor from heaven who told her that her son would not be a mere mortal, but in fact would be divine. His birth was accompanied by unusual divine signs in the heavens. As an adult, he left his home to engage in an itinerant preaching ministry. He gathered a number of followers around him who became convinced that he was no ordinary human, but that he was the Son of God. And he did miracles to confirm them and their beliefs. He could heal the sick, cast out demons, and rise from the dead. At the end of his life, he aroused opposition among the ruling authorities of Rome and was put on trial. But they could not kill his soul. He ascended to heaven. And who is this man that I am speaking of? Well, obviously it's Apollonius of Tyana. So that's how he would open up one of his classes with. So everybody's thinking, well, this whole story that you told us is obviously Jesus. And he goes, no, it's obviously somebody else that I was thinking of. So that's who I think would probably be one of the best examples, is Apollonius of Tyana, which would probably have, I guess, what they would say is the most parallels, but we're actually going to be looking at what type of parallels that they have between the life of Apollonius, which is the book that's based on. It's called the Life of Apollonius, and it's a total of 8 books that can be found. You can find them. I read them on livis.org. That is livius.org, and you can find these a series of books that you can read. And I believe that you can also find it on YouTube, where it's a how do you call it, an audiobook. So I believe that you can also listen to it that way. But yeah, I think that with these books, it's a really, really, really long book. And through all these books put together, I think that it's so long, you can find any parallels with anybody with just any little thing. So we're actually going to be looking through a few of them. So this is Apollonius of Tyana. So supposedly he was a real person, so that would be his statue that is made of him. And we're going to be going through a few that, we're going to be going through a few of the things that was said by Bart Ehrman in the beginning, if these things were actually true. So first of them that we're going to go through is, was he really born of a virgin? In the book, there is no instance of him being born of a virgin. And in fact, in the beginning of the book, it states that he had a mother and a father. And in the book, it mentions how when his mother gave birth, that she gave birth in a meadow where a group of swans flew down and danced around her. And then when she gave birth, a thunderbolt came down from the sky. And when it came down from the sky, it shot down and it moved up, and it didn't hit the ground. So one of the other things that the people also say is, that would also be, I guess, a sign of like the star in the east from the Bible. But I'm like, no, well, I guess it depends on how you take it. To me, it's just thunderbolt. And to me, her giving birth in a meadow, because there was nobody else. I don't really see how that's even considered a virgin birth. But people will draw a parallel through that. So I don't think that's really fair how they would group that together. The other part would be that there's no instance found where it says that he is the Son of God. There is nowhere in there that it says that he is. Where it says when the thunderbolt came down from the sky, it says that was kind of a sign that the gods acknowledged the birth of Apollonius. But in that same paragraph, when the thunderbolt comes down, it says that when they acknowledged the birth of Apollonius, that he was a sage in the same paragraph. So it never said that he was a god. So I guess that's something that they just kind of just throw in there, that Barton will just throw in there just to make it sound, the same as Jesus. So the next instance where he heals somebody, I guess it depends on how you would look at it, is how he would heal somebody. So we all know that when, Jesus performed miracles, that all he had to do was just touch him or speak it, and that was it. And tons of eyewitnesses would see him. But the way that Apollonius would heal somebody is that he more had the wisdom to heal and not really the physical touch of healing. And when he would supposedly, quote unquote, heal somebody, he would ask them to do various rituals with animals, and that would bring healing to their situation. So, he would just do like some random thing and just, say do something with a rabbit. And he would kind of like go into detail on what to do with a rabbit. And he goes, and that will heal you. But it's like something that's just completely, like totally, I think, fabricated by him just to make it seem like he could heal people. But I don't think that he really could. And there was really no eyewitnesses either that he really could. So all of these are just stories too, which I'll mention at the end of this part. So the next instance is where he cast out demons. The instance where he cast out demons aren't really a parallel to Jesus either. In one instance, he gives a woman a note with threats on it, and she has to give it to the ghost. And I guess that's how he would cast out a demon. And that, to me, that's not really casting out a demon. One of the other parts in the book where he supposedly casts out a demon is that he labels a beggar as a demon-possessed person. And when the beggar comes up to him, he just yells at him and says, "You're demon-possessed." And he tells the crowd around him to stone him. And the crowd around him believes him, and they end up stoning the beggar to death. So, I don't think that's really counted as, casting out a demon when he kills somebody, especially when you don't even know for sure if he's a demon possessed. But anyways, we're going to go on to the next one. So the next instance is where he raises a dead person back to life. So in the book, he raised a dead girl back to life, but the family around her claimed that she was dead. But the other eyewitnesses that were actually there with him said that they saw the steam coming off of her body and vapor coming from her mouth. So to me, that tells me that she wasn't really dead. I guess that since two people say two conflicting things, I mean, I guess you can take the first part and say, you know what? No, she really was dead. But I mean, when you have more eyewitnesses there that saying that she wasn't, I mean, they both have to be saying the same thing to be able to even think that it was true. So I would think that wouldn't even be a parallel to Jesus. At the end of the book, Apollonius was put on trial for saying a lot of things about Domitian, and Domitian was the emperor at the time. So he, at the end of the trial, he was also acquitted. He was also acquitted by Domitian, so nothing really happened to him. So all that was done was he was just put on trial. So just because you're put on trial doesn't make it a parallel to Jesus either. So, I mean, that's another thing that I guess you can bring up and say that it is a parallel. But I mean, to me, that goes for anybody. You can't say that. I guess anybody that's put on trial is a parallel with Jesus. That doesn't make any sense, unless it was put in trial exactly how Jesus was, which mentions no way in the book of Apollonius. So also the death of Apollonius. So it says at the bottom right here that he ascended into heaven. So how at the death of Apollonius, he had a disciple who was named Damas with him. And towards the end of the book, he tells Damas to go on an errand for him, and it was a really important errand to send this letter to Rome. So when Damas goes to Rome, he comes back and he has nowhere to. He can't find Apollonius anywhere. So he says that he pretty much like disappeared. Has no idea what happened to him. And it also talks about 4 possible stories that might have happened to Apollonius. So in all the 4 possible stories, it all mentions, that people apparently saw him somewhere, that he was moved somewhere to a certain island. Another story says that, nobody even saw him die, that he just lived and that was it. Nobody really saw him die. So I guess, that's no way a parallel to Jesus. There's no part in the book where it says that he actually ascended to heaven. It just says that nobody saw him die. That was it. But again, I don't think that would really be a parallel. So also a little bit of Apollonius is that he was born in 15 AD. So he was actually born after Jesus. The earlier sources of Apollonius was written by Philostratus, and that was written in the 3rd century in 225 AD. So Philostratus, since he wrote about Apollonius so long after his, I guess, since he lived, he is unsure about a lot of the things that happen in the book. So this is why he gives like 4 possible stories that he doesn't know what happened in his death, or he gives 2 conflicting statements about the raising of the dead girl back to life. He doesn't know what actually really happened. He doesn't know if she was actually dead or if she was alive by the other eyewitnesses that were there. So because he is unsure of a lot of the things that happened, this book is really written or classified as a novel. And since he didn't write it from any eyewitnesses' accounts or first-hand sources, it does not make it a biography. So if there are any parallels, I guess, that you can put that are in the book, I don't think that they're from Apollonius. I think that they're from Philostratus, taking them from Christianity and taking them from Jesus and putting it in the book. Because you got to look at it. This was written way after the books were already written. Most of the books were already written by 225 AD. By the 3rd century and the 300s, the whole canon of the Bible was already put out. So most of the books in the Bible were already written by this time. Maybe only a few, like Revelation, weren't known by 225. But I think most of the books were known by 225 AD. So that's how that's how I think that it's unfair to, I guess, pull out whatever you want out of this book and kind of say, well, that's a parallel of Jesus. Jesus was just a copycat. I was like, no, you really have to look into it and you really have to read it. But yeah, this is one of them. I think this is probably their best one that they could come up with. There are others. Me and my brother, we were talking about a movie that we had watched called Religulous by Bill Maher. And Bill Maher is a comedian. He did this movie with talking about Christians, talking about Mormons, talking about Jews, about a Jehovah's Witness, talking about Muslims. And he all kind of like asked them a bunch of questions, and he all brought up other deities that lived way before Jesus and said, you know what? Jesus copied all these people. I think that even the disciples probably copied all these people to make Jesus seem like a real person. So we're gonna we're gonna kind of go through some of them right here. So one of the big first ones that he mentions in the movie was Mithras. Mithras and Horus were two of the big ones that he mentions. And I actually, when I watched this, not to put my mom on blast, but I actually asked her about this. And I actually asked her if any of this was true, and she really didn't give me an answer. But this is something that I don't blame on my mom, but I think it's something that I think a lot of people in church have never heard of. And it's something that I think it's good to know, so you know what other people are talking about and what other people mean when they think that Jesus was just a myth. So we have Mithras. Mithras was a Persian deity back in 1200 BC. And they say that he was born of a virgin, born on December 25th, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, dead for 3 days. He resurrected, and he was called the Good Shepherd, Savior, Redeemer, the way, the truth, and the light. So are any of those even true? Well, after looking up Mithras, I didn't really find a whole lot of it. Going through the whole deity of Mithras, I found two very big things that I thought that were very interesting. The Mithras that is depicted in the movie that was listed around 1200 BC was actually, there's not a whole lot of information about it. When the Mithras cult came up, it actually came up in the 2nd century. That's when it got really popular. So back in the BC era, the only thing that we have proof of Mithras is like pottery, drawings, tablets, things like this on the bottom, which is him depicted of him killing a bull. But yeah, nothing's found up until the 2nd century, which is when we actually find writings of Mithras. So what do we know? What do we actually know about Mithras? Well, we know that he was born out of a rock. So because he was born out of a rock doesn't mean that he was born of a virgin. No, there was also no record of the date that when he was even born. So I mean, I don't really know where December 25th was given or where it came from. It also depicts in some of the tablets or drawings of Mithras. He was presented in some art surrounded by the zodiac, which is the 12 signs of the zodiac. And of course, those are not his disciples. The 12 signs of the zodiac has to do with the star constellations, and that's what they did with the Mithras cult, is that they worship the stars, and so that's why it's depicted with him with the 12 zodiac signs. So that does not mean that those were his 12 disciples. It also says that he performed miracles, but I guess you could take that as is, because I guess since he was depicted as a deity, they claim that he performed miracles. We don't know if he did or not. So I mean, we can go, sure, yeah, he performed miracles because he was worshipped as a deity. So I mean, that's probably the only thing that I can give him. Also, there was no record of his death. So because there was no record of his death, there could not be a resurrection. I don't know where they have that he was dead for 3 days, but because, kind of like Apollonius, nobody knows how he died or where he died. Nobody ever saw him, so you can't label that as a resurrection. It's just that nobody saw him die. Same thing with Mithras. Nobody knows what happened to him. So I don't think that that's really a good case for the resurrection. There is also no source that indicates that he was called any of the names, which is the Good Shepherd, Savior, Redeemer, the way, the truth, the light. There is no way in any of these inside the Mithras cult that any of this is even said anywhere. And even if it was said in somewhere, it had to have been after the 2nd century. So I did find somebody that did mention it, which is Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr, he is a 2nd century Christian apologist and theologian that lived in the time. And in 150 AD, there is some writings that Justin Martyr uh, put out. And in one of his writings, he mentions how the Mithras cult, they copied certain practices like the from the Christians, like the Last Supper, so that they copied our Last Supper, and they were doing it themselves in honor of Mithras, and that they also had stole certain scriptures from Daniel and Isaiah, and that how they use some of those to perform certain ceremonies and stuff like that. So, even if he was called, all these names, I think that they just stole it from the Bible at that time. So, I mean, I don't think that Mithras is really a good example of copycat or who Jesus would have copied, since it did come from the 2nd century. I would think that they copied from Jesus. From all the sources that I've been able to find, I can tell. The only thing that I can tell is that Mithras was copied from Jesus. So the next one that we have is Horus. Horus is the Egyptian god, and that was in 3000 BC. So it is claimed that he is born of a virgin, born on December 25th. There was a star in the east. He was baptized, has 12 disciples, performed miracles, crucified next to 2 thieves, buried for 3 days in the tomb, resurrected and witnessed by 2 women, and was also called the Anointed One, the Way, the Truth, the Light, Messiah, Son of Man, etc. And I remember Horus was a big one that was mentioned in that movie, Religious List. And they also mentioned a whole bunch of other stuff that Jesus had did. They mentioned that he even walked on water, that there was a bunch of stuff that they mentioned in that movie. So actually looking up Horus, there were only a few places that I can find that Horus was written about, and one of the biggest ones that Horus comes from is actually the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And the Book of the Dead is an extremely long book. It was not extremely long, but it's a very long book and a very confusing book when you read through it. And looking for any of this stuff, I have honestly no idea how these people came up with any of this stuff. Because to me, I couldn't find any parallel anywhere between Horus and Jesus. So what I had to go through different sources to actually verify what I was reading. I was like, maybe I'm not reading the right thing. And I had to look at different scholars that have actually studied the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And I've gathered some information where I can, where I can know that, well, I guess what I was reading was correct, or what I thought about Horus was correct, and which I'll share with you right here. So in the Book of the Dead, it presents that he was a god, and in the form of a falcon. And in the form of a falcon, his right eye was the sun or the morning star, and his left eye was a moon or the evening star. And with that, I guess that's how they come up with the Star of the East. But I mean, that's just a parallel that I think that they're just saying, just because it says star, that it's the same star as in the Bible, which is not a parallel. So it says that Horus was born from the goddess Isis, and she was married to the god Osiris. And there was no mention of a virgin birth. I mean, they were actually married. The way that they kind of brought up the whole virgin birth was just so bizarre and strange. It says that that Osiris actually had a brother, and his name was Set. And his brother was so jealous of the relationship that Isis and Osiris had, that Set, I guess, killed Osiris. And it just says that he tore him apart to pieces. And when he tore him apart to pieces, the Isis went and I guess like picked him up and mended them back together. And when she mended them back together, she only mended them back together for so long, just enough time just to only have sex with him and to get pregnant from him. And then he died. But I was like, that's not even a virgin birth out. I don't know. It's so weird and it's so bizarre. I guess people want to label that as a virgin birth. To me, it was just a very bizarre story that I don't think has any parallel. So I guess that's where they would get it. That's where they would get the virgin birth. Also, there is no mention that he was even born on December 25th. The In the Book of the Dead, it only mentions that he was born during the Egyptian month of, I believe it's pronounced Koak. It's Khoiak, and that month in the Egyptian calendar can even be related to present day because the Egyptian calendar was based on the tidal fluctuations of the Nile River. So there's no way that we could even we would even know that it was even December 25th. The people or scholars would likely put his birth around November, but I mean that's even if he was even a real person. Um, there is Horus was also he was also never a teacher, so he never had any disciples and he was never baptized. So it also mentions the person that actually baptized, which was called Anup the Baptizer. And that's what they say, that's what they even mention in the movie, is that's who he was baptized by. And they say that Anup the Baptizer was also translated as John the Baptist in Egyptian, which I looked it up and there's no way that I was translated as John the Baptist in Egyptian. That means something completely different. And even when you read through the Book of the Dead, I couldn't find anywhere that Anup the Baptizer even existed. There's no mention of him anywhere. And I had to look this up through different scholars and see, maybe it mentions him somewhere else. And nope, it doesn't mention in any other form or text that they have. So I have no idea where they also get this from. There's one thing that I'll mention at the end where I think where they get a lot of this from. I think that was like most of them. So also for the miracles, well, because he was a god, I guess you could say that he did perform miracles and he did do certain things. So that's also probably something that you just give to them, because he was also worshipped as deity. So of course they would say that he did miracles. Um, so the next three, which is being crucified, being buried, and resurrected. A lot of these things that I found that I had to look up through different scholars was that a lot of these things, especially that Bill Maher got this from, had to be from the writings of Gerald Macy, who wrote in one of his books in 1907. And in 1907, he invented it in his writings about Egypt, and it was discredited by many Egyptologists. And so Gerald Macy was kind of a self-proclaimed like an anthropologist, Egyptologist, and a lot of these things he kind of like made up in his book, I guess, to make sound good or something. And the healing that is associated with Eye of the Horus among the cult of believers of Horus, there were no eyewitness account of him ever displaying any healings, no sources of him being crucified, buried, resurrected, or any of the names called. And many of these claims are based on the assumptions and writings by General Macy, which is not considered an authentic source of information. So, any of these things I couldn't even find anything of. So that's the only place where I can find is that they had to have got this information from Gerald Macy, who wrote it in his book. So we're going to go on to the next one, which was Dionysus. Dionysus is a Greek god, and this was dated about 500 BC, and it also says that he was born of a virgin, born on December 25th, performed miracles, depicted as being crucified. He resurrected, and called King of Kings, God of Gods, begotten Son, Savior, Redeemer, Anointed One, Alpha and Omega. So are any of those even true with Dionysus? So Dionysus was, when reading about him, he was either a result of an affair from Zeus that he had with one of his human princesses, or his daughter Persephone. So there were two different accounts of either one, so it could have been one of them. So because he had an affair with one of them, that's how Dionysus was born. So that doesn't make it a virgin birth. And I guess coming from Zeus depicting him as a god, that's where they would get the virgin birth. But to me, it doesn't really sound like it was a virgin birth. There's also no mention of December 25th anywhere. In all these things, I just think December 25th is just something they just bring up just to make it sound like a parallel. And any of them, I haven't been able to find anything of December 25th. Also, Dionysus, he is considered the god of wine. So that's how he performed miracles, saying that, he provided wine to all these people. So I guess that you can give him that's how he performed miracles. But other than that, that's all that he really did, was he supplied wine. So also, if people say like, well, that's how he there's that parallel, is that he made water into wine. I mean, there's a parallel between Dionysus and Jesus. But if you read through any of the literature, Roman literature about Dionysus, there's nowhere that he turned water into wine anywhere. So there is also no source of him being crucified. Where they get him being crucified is actually in this picture at the bottom. So this picture on the bottom, it looks like Dionysus being crucified on a cross. And this is called the Orifice amulet. And actually, the Orifice amulet was actually found to be a forgery that was from the early 20th century. So that is a fake, and we know that he was really crucified. I'm guessing that this was probably just a parallel that they depicted to make it look like Jesus. Dionysus was, the way that he died, it was actually, he was ripped apart by the Titans, and his heart was taken and put into a new mother, and he had a second birth from that new mother. I don't know how that's considered a resurrection, but that's how they would consider it, being a parallel to Jesus for the resurrection. So I don't think that that's really a parallel either. So I think that's another one that we can also scratch off. And also, in any of the literature, there's no source for any of the names that were given to him from this either. I think a lot of these names that they get from, they have to have gotten it from Christianity. They have to have gotten it from the Bible. So in any of these three that are mentioned here, I think that there's a lot that they grabbed from the Bible and they grabbed from Jesus to make it look like a parallel. So, I mean, these are some of the biggest myths that I thought were probably the best myths that I can find, that people usually use. There's a number of different deities that people will use, and none of them I thought were even as good as these. And going through these, I mean, all you have to do is just look them up, and you can see that they're easily disproven. So, just taking it from different people, and that's what I think a lot of people do, especially non-believers, when they say that Jesus is a myth and they use these, they don't even look at it themselves. They don't really look up any of this information from themselves. All they do is just get the information from somebody else and just relay it back to you. But when they relay it back to you, Christians are so caught off guard because we've never heard any of this stuff. There's no way I can guarantee you 99% of Christians have never even heard of any of this stuff. Don't even know what they'd even be talking to. So it's kind of like a shock moment when they tell you this. Is like, what? I never heard of that. Like, you have no response at all. But because you have no response, it kind of leaves the person like, well, I got you there. Like, you have no answer for it now. So, kind of knowing this stuff, I think is good to know, and kind of a good way to question the people that also bring up this stuff. So when they bring up this stuff, just ask them, well, what proof do you have of any of it? Did you hear from somebody else, or did you actually read any of this stuff? And if they did, ask them to show you. Ask them to show you, like, where did you find it? I'll look it up with you, or I'll look it up when I get home or something. But yeah, I think that's a good way, maybe a good strategy of probably asking people to, have them provide the burden of proof rather than you. Because they're the ones claiming all this stuff, not you. When they bring this up, they're the ones claiming all this stuff, so they have the burden of proof to prove all this stuff. But going through all these different ones, it was pretty easy to disprove some of these. Some of these other ones, like horrors, you actually have to really dig through stuff, and you have to look through other people. Yeah, that's kind of a mess for everything. So actually, we're going to know. So since how do we actually know the historicity of Jesus? How do we know that Jesus actually existed then? One of, I think, the worst arguments that a Christian can give is because the Bible says so. And I really, really don't like that argument. because the Bible says so. I guess it's good enough for some people to say, because I guess we look at the Bible different than non-believers. When we look at the Bible, we look at the Bible as the inerrant word of God, the inspiration of God. So we hold the Bible to a higher level of standard than most people. But when most people look at the Bible, they just see it as a book. So they put it way down here. So to them, it's because if you say the Bible says so, it's kind of just like, okay, and so what? Like, where's the proof? So when I'm actually going to go through the next thing, which is the sources of Jesus, and this was actually my next step in actually going through my apologetic walk of.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah, go ahead.
Quick comment right now that you said about.
Or even keep going.
I had you reminded me of right now that you said about sometimes people will say, well, because the Bible says so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I shared it with you, but maybe everyone could listen in. But I did had a college professor that kind of brought that up to me, and I think you're right. Where I grew up in church, so I think when people say because the Bible says, to me, I see it like, well, I know the Bible is a holy book. It's a holy Bible, so I'm like, of course, I see it that way.
Yeah.
But obviously, this professor I had in college, he atheist, doesn't believe in God, doesn't like respect the word, doesn't see it like I see it. So he brought up that conversation and said, yeah, he did see it like kind of like you mentioned right now, just as any book or whatever,
Yep.
And he said, well, how is it that people say, well, it's in the Bible? And he pretty much used the example of, you can't write a book yourself and say, well, it's true because it's in this book that I wrote.
Right.
So that's he was saying.
The way that I heard it is, you can't prove the Bible with the Bible.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So you know what? I thought that was a valid point he made. So I think I would agree with you that maybe sometimes as believers we do have to go deeper.
Yeah. No, you do. Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing with that, because I have heard that from my college professors too. The philosophy professor that I had was an atheist, and I was actually scared to even say anything in that class because he would pick people apart. Anybody that said that they believed in anything, he would pick them apart. I had no idea how to answer any of his objections or anything. But yeah, so through my search or my journey in faith, when I came back to church, this was my next biggest thing. So I had that seed kind of already like planted in me from that movie that I had to watch a long time ago. And I was like, man, maybe we don't really know what we believe in, or maybe what we believe in is false. But I've never really really looked into it or really brought it forward and really hit hard with that question. Kind of always just had it in the back of my mind. I was like, well, I was born and raised in church. I mean, where else am I gonna go? I have all my friends in church. I mean, I'll just keep going with it. But I guess at this stage of my life, I was like, you know what? What I have to know is the truth. I have to know the absolute truth. Even if this breaks everything down for me, even if I find out that this is totally a hoax and I can't find anything, at least I know the truth. And this, I was really nervous getting into these next three things, or not the well, mostly the next two things, which is the historicity of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus. The crucifixion I wasn't too worried about because we had Mark Amin as a youth pastor, so we know quite a bit about the death of Jesus. But the historicity of Jesus, I knew nothing about, and the resurrection, I had no idea how to prove that. So going through those two things, I was really nervous getting into, and I was expecting to find nothing on it. And I thought that I was kind of going to be like scrambling for my faith, like not even knowing where I was going to be left. But I actually found quite a few things. So the way that I went about it, I kind of just put the Bible to the side at this point. At this point, I was already going through the New Testament. But when I started researching about Jesus, I kind of had to put the Bible to the side. Even though I was reading it, I had to put it to the side. And I had to put, if I'm going to look up Jesus, I have to look it up from as much different sources as I can outside of the Bible. Every single source I had to have had to be from outside of the Bible. And I kind of like told myself, if Jesus was a real person, if he was this important, there had to be other people that wrote about him. So this is the way that I went through it. So one of the first ones that I found was actually the Jewish Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud, it consists of 63 books, and it consists of legal, ethical, spiritual, theological, ritual, and historical insight for the Jews. And I found this very, very interesting because from what I know, the Jews don't even believe in Jesus. When they look at Jesus, they think of Jesus as kind of a representation for the Jewish people. This is why they don't believe in the resurrection or any of that stuff. But in the Jewish Talmud, it actually has this quote, which is written in Sanhedrin 43a, and this was written between 70 and 200 AD. And it says, on the eve of Passover, they hang Yeshu, which is translated as Jesus. And in one of the versions of the text, it actually says Yeshu of the Nazarene. And an announcer went out in front of him for 40 days saying, he is going to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and enticed and led Israel astray. Anyone who knows anything in his favor, let him come and plead in this behalf. But not having found anything in his favor, they hanged him on the eve of Passover. So I thought it was really interesting because in this text alone proves that Jesus existed, for one. It proves that he was also crucified on the eve of the Passover, that he performed miracles, that he led people astray from legalistic Jewish teaching, and that the Jewish leaders were plotting to kill Jesus. So, I mean, it's corroboration from what actually the New Testament says in its own Jewish teaching. So I thought that was really, really interesting. The next one I have, this is a really famous one that a lot of people bring up, and he is the Jewish historian Josephus. Josephus has a few books, and he talks about the whole first century of Jewish people, and he has a lot of writings, and he also mentions Jesus quite a bit. And Josephus, he was born in 37 A.D., and he began writing the history of the war between the Romans and the Jews in the 70s. And later, he published one of his first books, which is called the Jewish Antiquities. So there's the Jewish Antiquities and also the Antiquities of the Jews. But the Jewish Antiquities is written around 93 and 94 AD. And I also have the verse that it's also mentioned on, which is this quote. It says, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonders, a teacher, such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew many things after him, both of the Jews and the Gentiles. He was the Christ he was the Christ. When Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, he had condemned him to the cross. Those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so named after him, are not extinct to this day." So I think this is a very powerful statement because Josephus was a non-Christian. So this is a really powerful statement coming from a non-Christian. And this was actually, since this was written in 93, 94 AD, it was still written within the period of the eyewitnesses. So there is some doubt, although in this quote, regarding all the words, there are some words that are believed to be added, and those I put in italics, which are kind of mentioned here. So those that you see that are in italics could have been added later. But even if you were to take out all the parts that were in italics and just left with the rest, I mean, it still it's still a really powerful statement, and it still provides proof that, you know, Jesus was a real man, was crucified, and he had a following, and that Christians were still alive at the time, even during the eyewitnesses, when Jesus had been crucified. So yeah, it provides corroboration for the New Testament too. So I thought that, you know, even going through there's a bunch of other stuff that Josephus has written that also provides corroboration that Jesus was a real person, or that he believed that even that Jesus was a real person. So one of the next ones I also thought was very interesting is Tacitus. So the historian Tacitus is regarded as one of the biggest anti-Christians. He hated the Christians. And Tacitus was born in 55 AD. And he wrote 5 histories that covers only the history of, and it covers only the history of the Emperor Galba from 68 to 69 AD. And it covers to the beginning of the reign of Vespasian in 70 AD. He also wrote he wrote a 12-volume set called the Annals, which spans a historical time period from the reign of Tiberius, which predates the ministry of Jesus, to the reigns of Claudius, and the beginning of Nero's, which dates to the last years of Paul's ministry. So this is what's written in the Annals that Tacitus wrote, and it says, but not all the relief that could come from a man, not all the bounties that the prince could bestow, nor all the atonements which could be presented to the gods, availed to relieve Nero from the infamy of being believed to have ordered the conflagration of the fire of Rome. Hence, to suppress the emperor, he falsely charged with the guilt and punished Christians, who were hated for their enormities. Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea in reign of Tiberius. But the pernicious superstition, repressed for a time, broke out again, not only through Judea, where the mischief originated, but through the city of Rome also, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world, where every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pled guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. So you can tell in just the statement alone, he really hated Christians and he hated the Jews. So for somebody that hated him so much, he acknowledged that this Jesus was a real person, and that all these Christians, you know, Christianity came out of it. So he acknowledged the existence of Jesus and many of the believers, and in the quote mentions the belief that Christians had in the resurrection, and provided extra biblical support of details mentioned in the New Testament. So yeah, I thought that this was really interesting about Tacitus, which proves, you know, the historicity of Jesus and the early Christians. So next we have is the historian Pliny the Younger. So Pliny the Younger, he was born in 61 AD, and he practiced law at the age of 18, and he later served as governor, where he became well known for trying officials for extortion. He published about 10 books, and they all contained a varieties of letters. And in one of the letters, he wrote to the Emperor Trajan at the time. And when he wrote the letter, it was his concern about the Christians. At this time, Christians who were brought to Pliny the Younger, they seemed harmless, but they were refusing to worship the Roman emperor. So because they refused to worship the Roman emperor, Pliny the Younger decided to execute several of the Christians. And so he executed the Christians that were brought before him that did not deny their faith. So he wrote to Emperor Trajan for advice. So in this letter, I didn't include it in the slide because it's a very long letter. So I'm going to kind of just tell about what it kind of goes through. In the letter, it describes the judgmental process and the capital punishment of those proclaiming Christianity. And it also describes how many Christians would choose their death over cursing Jesus. So Pliny the Younger would tell them to curse Jesus, and some of them wouldn't. And they'd rather choose death than to even curse Jesus. But Pliny the Younger would also describe in detail, in very specific detail, of those who would deny their faith and would save their lives. So they actually would curse Christians in order, or curse Jesus in order to save their lives. And he did describe it in detail about what they would do and why they would do it. And the letter, it points out the strength in the belief in the resurrection as superstition, but it also how the believers span a broad group of people, and he describes how it's young, old, male, female, and of every social class, and how quickly that it was spreading throughout the whole region. So yeah, that's what he wrote to Tiberius. So he acknowledged that these Christians were spreading at such a fast rate, and that they believed in something more than themselves. They believed in something that they thought that was real. And yeah, so I thought that was really interesting with Pliny the Younger. One of the next ones that I'll actually present is Emperor Hadrian. And Emperor Hadrian was another one that didn't like Christians at all. So Hadrian was the emperor of Rome from 117 to 138 AD. And he had a significant impact on the Jews and the Christians. He had a significant impact on the Jewish and Christian world. In an attempt to get rid of Christians and any memories of holy sites of Jesus, Emperor Hadrian actually built a pagan temple over the site of the crucifixion, and placed statues of Venus on it. And in place of the crucifixion, he placed Jupiter in place, or I'm sorry, he placed statues of Venus over the site of the crucifixion and placed statues of Jupiter in place of the resurrection. So he would do this in hopes of causing Christians to actually forget these sites. But it kind of backfired, because it only helped as serving as markers for allowing people to respect these holy sites later on. So it actually backfired on them, and that's how I guess most people knew later on where the crucifixion and resurrection actually happened, was because Hadrian had put statues there. Hadrian, he also executed Christians that would deny their faith and not bow down to the Roman gods. So Hadrian's policies and writings, which were quite a few of them, they provide non-Christian evidence that present with some eyewitnesses of Jesus, of the rapid spread of Christianity and of the strong belief in the resurrection. So, a lot of these things that he actually wrote about actually proves, that same thing as Pliny the Younger, that Christians believed in something bigger than themselves, something that they believed that was real. And they believed that, that Jesus actually did what he said, which was he preached, he was crucified, and he resurrected. So these are some of the best sources to validate the spread of Christianity, by acknowledging the historicity of Jesus and the impact that he made on the region. And these were only some of them. I actually have a few more that I didn't include quotes or anything from, because there were so many of them. So these are other outside sources that I actually found that I thought were also extremely interesting. These first are the non-Christian sources. So we have the first by historian Suetonius, the historian Phlegon, Lucian Samosata, historian Tellus, the Emperor Trajan, which he actually replied back to Pliny the Younger, and the Stoic philosopher Bar Mara Serapion. And so these are some of the non-Christian sources that we have that were written. I have the times that they were actually written in their quotes or in their sources. So these are Christian sources that I had found, which was Clement, which was the elder of Rome, and he wrote a letter to the Corinthian church. Also found Ignatius, who was the bishop of Antioch, and he wrote letters to the Trallians, the Smyrnians, and the Magnesians. And we also have Cratus, who wrote to Emperor Hadrian, and we also have Justin Martyr, who wrote to Emperor Antonius Pius, and he also wrote the dialogue with Trypho. So these were only a few of them. Actually, in total, there are probably about 40 different sources. So 40 different people that actually mention Jesus outside the Bible. One of the things that I had kind of mentioned somebody else say was at that time when during the time of Jesus, who was the emperor during that time? It was Tiberius. And how many sources do we have of Tiberius? Out of all the sources that we have of Tiberius, we only have 10 sources of Tiberius, and nobody questions if he was a myth or if he was real. Everybody thinks that he was a real person. Everybody knows that he's a real person. So to have at least 40 different sources of Jesus and people still question that it's a myth is, to me, it's baffling. So this is what I found, and I thought was so interesting because I was expecting not to find like very much stuff. But there are so many things or so many different sources that you find from different people, both non-Christian and Christian, that will vouch for Jesus, that he did what he said he did. He preached, did miracles, had a following of disciples, that he died, or that he was crucified, that he resurrected, that the disciples went out and preached the whole faith of Christianity after that, and that a huge group of people and following came up out of that, and pretty much almost out of like nothing, people just started becoming Christians by the thousands. And that's what it mentions in the book of Acts that we will get later in going through the resurrection of Jesus. So these are actually some of the quotes that I actually found from different scholars. So we have Marcus Borg. He says some judgments are so probable as to be certain. For example, Jesus really existed and he really was crucified, just as Julius Caesar really existed and was assassinated. We can, in fact, know as much about Jesus as we can about any figure in the ancient world. Bart Ehrman, famous atheist, says, I don't think there's any serious historian who has doubts the existence of Jesus. We have more evidence for Jesus than we have for almost anybody from his time period. And we have Michael Grant. He says, we can no more reject Jesus' existence than we can reject the existence of a mass of pagan personages whose reality as historical figures is never questioned. In recent years, no serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus, or at any rate, very few, and they have not succeeded in disposing of the much stronger, indeed very abundant evidence to the contrary. Grant Stanton, he says, today nearly all historians, whether Christian or not, accept that Jesus existed, and that the Gospels certain plenty of valuable evidence which has to be weighed and assessed critically. And also famous N.T. Wright also says, the historical evidence of Jesus for Jesus himself is extraordinarily good. From time to time, people try to suggest that Jesus of Nazareth never existed, but virtually all historians of whatever background now agree that he did. So, you have all these scholars, all these professors, all these doctors, PhDs that mention this, and they all acknowledge, whether they are believers or non-believers, we have very, very good existence that Jesus really did exist and that he was a real person. So one of the next things that I also wanted to get over before we got into the resurrection we'll get into in the next meeting. But in this meeting, I wanted to go over the crucifixion of Jesus. So through the crucifixion of Jesus, there are some people that still, they say, okay, well, even if he did exist, I don't believe that he died. And how would you prove that he actually died? And I think for some of us, it might be pretty easy because we were actually brought up in this from an early age, and we've heard this over and over again about the crucifixion of Jesus. I thought we were pretty fortunate to have Brother Mark Amin as a youth pastor, and we've heard him preach many times on the crucifixion of Jesus. And we, as the youth group, we knew it in really great detail, or practically as a church in the Mount Vernon Church in Bakersfield, we all knew in detail of how the crucifixion looked. So people that bring up that he never really died, some of them that bring that up will be Muslims. Muslims do not believe that Jesus had died. They may believe that he actually existed, and that they may believe that he was tortured and beat and crucified, but they do not believe that he died. And this is something that they will bring up, and I think that the crucifixion in detail would have to be brought up to them to prove that he really did die. And I think the crucifixion of Jesus, in proving that he did die, also makes for a more powerful case of the resurrection. So we're going to go into the in detail about the different parts of the crucifixion. So right before the crucifixion, you have where Jesus he sweats blood, and that's mentioned in Luke 22:44, where he goes and he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. And when Jesus sweats blood, this is a known medical condition, and it's called hematidrosis. And this is an experience where people they experience tremendous amount of emotional and physiological stress, and they sweat blood. And this is caused by little blood vessels that are in the glands called capillaries, and the capillaries break down and they mix with the sweat. And when the sweat comes out, it looks like blood because it is blood. So that's how that's one of the things that that would be true when Jesus sweats blood. So when he did sweat blood, this will make the skin very sensitive, and it would make it very easy to bruise. So having his sensitive skin and the bruising of the skin, this would make it more painful for what is more to come. So next we have, even before he was flogged, Jesus was mocked and beaten. So right before he was in put to trial, it says in Luke 22:63-65, it says, and the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him and beating him, and they blindfolded him and were asking him, saying, prophesy, who is the one who hit you? And they were saying many other things against him, blaspheming. So even before he got to even being flogged, he was already being beaten by Sanhedrin before his trial with Pilate. So now we have the next theme, which is the flogging and crown of thorns. So looking up through the flogging is one of the most horrific things that the Romans could have done at the time. So the flogging of Jesus, it consisted of a leather whip that you can see pictured here, and the whip contained pieces of metal and bone wrapped in leather. And it was utilized to come across the back, shoulders, and legs of the victim. The first few passes, they would go particularly go through the skin and the fat, but eventually it would strip the outer layer away and rip through the muscles and the tendons, sometimes getting all the way to the bone. And some people have, in Roman literature, have been recorded to die just by the flogging alone. And that's how horrific the flogging would be. And some of them, what would even happen is when they would reach across, because the whip would be so long, and when they'd hit the victim, sometimes those whips would not just cut across the back, but would reach around the corner and pull their stomach. And on the stomach, it's one of the thinnest linings of the body, and what it would do is when they would pull back, it would rip the stomach open, and it would pull out their intestines, and all their organs would fall out, gushing out on the floor. So I mean, the flogging was one of the worst things that happened. I remember reading once, I didn't include here, but I just remembered, was that the flogging in Jewish tradition, when they would do it, in Jewish tradition, it would have to be, I think it was 40 times. And I believe that my dad would know this, that he had to be whipped in the back 40 times or more. And I believe that something had happened where they believed that it was more than 40 times that Jesus had whipped in the back. And I don't remember that specifically, I don't remember, but I do remember hearing that in different parts that I've heard and read. But yeah, we also have the crown of thorns. The plant that describes as a crown of thorns, the thorns would reach about 1.5 to 2 inches in length. So I mean, they weren't just short little rose bush needles; they were really long needles. And when the crown of thorns was shoved into the head, it would penetrate all the way down to the bone. And when it would penetrate down to the bone, it would sever vast amounts of blood vessels that supplied blood to the head, and this would result in a considerable amount of blood loss. So, the flogging and the crown of thorns, just by themselves right there would be a huge amount of blood loss right there. So after the flogging, Jesus had to carry the cross to the crucifixion site. So this is how it would likely happen when he would carry the cross. So the cross, it was, or the crucifixion site was located, I think, about half mile from where he was being flogged. So the cross, together with both beams, would be about 300 pounds, and there was no way that Jesus would be able to carry 300 pounds. So it is very likely that Jesus only carried the top beam to the crucifixion site. And this you would also see right here that it also mentions in Roman literature that others would also do this, that they would carry just the crossbeam, and that so that they wouldn't drop it, they would put rope around. So it would kind of be like tied to his back, and that's how would you have to how would you have to go to the crucifixion site. So one of the next things I have is the crucifixion of Jesus. So the crucifixion, if the flogging and the crown of thorns and the carrying and the beating and all that wasn't enough, they had to perform one of the most horrific parts of torture that could be inflicted on a human being, which was the crucifixion of a person. So the crucifixion, once the crucifixion area was reached, the victim actually would be offered a drink of wine mixed with myrrh to act as a mild painkiller. And that was a charitable service that was performed by the women of Jerusalem. And it actually mentions this in Mark 15:23. And it says in Mark 15:23, then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. He didn't even take the painkillers, so he felt every single he felt every part of the pain that was inflicted on him. No painkillers at all. The amount of pain that he had to feel going through this is extraordinary. The nails that you'll see right here had to have been about 6 inches long. These nails, they were hammered into the wrists. So the wrist is also considered part of the palms, and it couldn't have been hammered into the palms because the flesh of your palms wouldn't support the weight of the body. So if they were put into the palms, when the body would lean against the nails put into the palms, it would simply just rip out. So it had to have been through the wrist. And the wrist is technically considered part of the hand. And the nails were pierced. When the nails were pierced through the wrist, you'll see right here that it had to have severed the median nerve. And the median nerve is a nerve that is actually it connects all the way up to the shoulder. So when as he pushed up to breathe, the wrists would actually rotate against the nail, and it would cause irritation to the nerves, causing an immense, intense pain in the arms. And it was also believed that in the crucifixion position, it would dislocate the shoulder or the elbow, and that any movement would aggravate the pain from the injuries. And in this way, Jesus, he was forced to support himself onto a single nail that was hammered into both of his feet, put together. And when he would push up to breathe, because it was because of that median nerve that was severed through the wrist, he would have to push up to breathe with his feet. and he would have to use all of his back muscles to push up to breathe. And when he would do that, it would tend to reopen the wounds that were caused from the flogging, and that would even embed more splinters into the back, leading to more pain and more blood loss. So the piercing through the feet, which is given right here, that would have actually pierced two different nerves. So the two different nerves are the peroneal nerve and the lateral plantar nerve. And this severing of both nerves would cause excruciating pain. And remember, when he'd have to breathe, he'd have to push up from his feet. So the amount of pain in his legs, I mean, he was feeling pain everywhere. I mean, any little movement, there had to be an immense, intense amount of pain. And usually the crucifixion with some people, it would actually take either all day, and in some cases, they'd actually leave him there for a few days, for a couple days. But with Jesus, he only lasted 6 hours because of the amount of torture that he inflicted. So the amount of torture that they put on Jesus was more than the average person was to get when they would get crucified. So he felt more than normally would. And so we also have the spear that punctured his side. So this is how we know that he actually did die. So the spear that punctured into the chest was usually done to assure that the victim was dead. The blood and water spilled out, as mentioned in John 19:34. It says one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. So that's how we know that blood and water came out when it was punctured. And this would entail that either this would entail either pleural effusion or pericardial effusion. And pleural effusion is the buildup of excess fluid that's around the lungs, and this would result in heart failure. Pericardial effusion is the buildup of excess fluid around the heart, and fluid buildup around this puts pressure on the heart, and that'll also result in heart failure. So the blood that came out, so that would be the water that came out. The blood that came out could have come from the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, the aorta, the vena cava, or the heart itself. And any of which, if blood came out of any of those different parts of the body or parts around the heart or the heart itself, if it were even done today, there wouldn't even be enough time to even save the person. The person would have to be saved within a few minutes of having a puncture like that and having that amount of blood loss. So, having Jesus, even if he wasn't dead by that time, that would have killed him. But having that buildup of water would give good reason that he actually died of a heart failure. And one very poetic way that I heard one preacher use was, with the proof of him dying of heart failure, that means that Jesus actually died of a broken heart. And I thought that was a really poetic way of kind of putting the death of Jesus. So fun fact, this is one of the three swords, which is I believe it's called the holy spear. I think it's called the holy spear. But there are three of them that are known to have been the spear that actually punctures the sides of Jesus. And I believe that this one is held in a museum in Austria, in Vienna, Austria. And this is one of three that is believed to be the original. But I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, that would be the crucifixion of Jesus and how we would actually know how that happened. So yeah, all right, I got you guys back on screen. So I mean, that's all that I had for today's meeting, and I thought a lot of what we went over today was very interesting, especially in my journey and walk through all this. It was so interesting to learn about all this stuff. Even going through all this studying, I mean, I learned some things that I hadn't even known, especially about like Horus. I knew some things about him, but I didn't know that much, and going into detail about it. And and even especially going through the crucifixion, going about even what Brother Mark Amin preached about. I mean, even studying it for myself, I was like, oh my god, like some of the stuff I didn't remember, some of it was even new to me, and I was like, oh wow, that's pretty crazy. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much all that I have for today's lesson. I mean, if you guys want to talk about it, or
I was gonna ask you.
yeah,
I know that you mentioned that something about the Mark Amin, like explaining
yeah.
it. Can you briefly kind of mention maybe how he explained it? Because I mean, I wasn't there.
No, how Brother Martin mentioned it.
Yeah, like what does he say, or what's something that kind of stuck with you that he explained?
Oh, he pretty much it was almost the exact same thing that he would mention. I think I might have gone into a little bit more detail than Brother Mark would have gone, because like going into where the nail was. Well, he would go into where the nails were pierced, but actually where it pierced, like the median nerve or in the nerves in the feet. I don't remember Brother Mark ever talking about that, but I remember how Brother Mark he would talk about especially the flogging. Brother Mark would put the flogging into explicit detail about what would happen when the whip would go across the back and what would happen. And he would talk a lot about, especially about the crucifixion, when how Jesus would die, the way that he died, um, how he would have to hold himself up to breathe, and how much excruciating pain that he had to have been just hanging there on the cross. It's just not hanging there; it's hanging there in pain from the bottom of your feet all the way to the top of the head. It's pain for 6 hours straight. And to me, it's like unbelievable, especially going through this. I don't remember Brother Mark ever mentioning about, I don't remember him mentioning about how much pain, but I guess revisiting this and researching this again, I was like, oh my God, like I don't remember it being like this much in pain. Like, this was one of the most horrible ways that a person could have died. And for anybody to think that know that somebody could have survived this, even I remember even Brother Mark would even say, even if Jesus was brought down, well, actually I don't remember if he said this. I don't remember if he said this, or I read this somewhere. But even if Jesus was brought down from the cross and they had to dress up his wounds and heal him, there was no way that he would have been walking. There was no way that he would have been like up and talking and eating. I mean, he would have been in such critical condition. I mean, he couldn't have lived more than like a few days or even like a few months or weeks. I mean, it couldn't have been years. There's no way. But yeah, Brother Mark, he would go into like graphic detail about what would happen through, the pain that Jesus felt. And, Brother Mark, oh my God, he would literally, like, I remember the first time listening to him and looking at everybody else, and we were just crying because it's just the way that he puts it. Brother Mark puts all his heart into it. And, Brother Mark, he the way that he preaches even like feels like he's like feeling it.
That's
But
powerful. No, I was asking because right now that you were going through it, especially the last slides with the nails and all, like to be honest, I don't know if I ever necessarily heard preaching going into that much detail.
yeah,
Like how you were explaining it, um, I don't know, it just made it more so real.
right. Then one way that I had heard about it. I don't know if you've ever watched the Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. His movie being rated R was the most graphic depiction of the crucifixion, or the leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus, from leading up till now. But even with what he showed, he still had to tame it down a little bit to keep it rated R. It's the crucifixion, or even leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus, was still even more graphic than what the Passion of Christ depicted. That's how bad it was. Yeah, to me, I'm like, oh, that's crazy.
You were gonna say.
I think if you look up on YouTube, his preaching might be up somewhere. If it's not there,
Okay.
you can always send a direct message to his wife is on Instagram, Sister Dahlia. I know that she keeps a lot of his preachings.
Oh,
She
okay,
might
all
be
right. That's cool.
like where you can find it.
All right,
But,
I'll look it up. I'll look it up, and I'll if I find it, I'll send it to you guys. If
Yeah,
they
that
if
would
they
be
have a
great.
preaching up. But
also, on top
oh yeah, go ahead.
of the whole idea of the crucifixion, I think one thing that people often drive home in Christian churches is the significance of Jesus' sacrifice. But I think one thing that people should really acknowledge is the cross is a human torture device. Like it's something
Yeah,
that we created, something
yeah,
that humans, in their anger and in their frustrations, they made. And to try and identify ourselves in that history and
hmm
what we've done uh, to lessen the true loving gospel that Jesus came to preach. I think that's a really big thing that can like open up people's spirituality.
right. Oh, I think it's
Yeah.
very good. Did I don't know if you wanted to mention any more, Mom. I mean, or Tim. I know you guys have listened, probably might maybe listened to Mark Amin's preaching a lot more recently than I have. I mean, it's been a while since I've listened to his preaching on the resurrection.
Been a while. The things that stick out on my mind, and that I remember him mentioning, how he was mutilated, that he was unrecognizable.
Hmm. Right.
Um, the other thing that I remember he mentions is how they pulled his beard,
Hmm.
and the pulling of the beard that came off with skin.
Yeah.
Just, there's just so much
Yeah.
that so much detail, like you say.
Right. Right. And it's a lot, and I think it's when you look at it, I think it's really important to look at how much infliction that he endured, and not just because the people wanted it, it was because he was willing to do it, and he was willing to endure all of it. And that scripture in Mark, I never even knew. I don't remember ever reading that, and I was like, oh my God, like I didn't know that that was taken as a painkiller. So that was really surprising to me when I was looking it up. And I was like, so that means that Jesus was willing to feel every single bit of pain for us. And to
And
me, that makes it even more powerful.
yeah, I heard a message just this week, uh, that how the crucifixion was a, something that was done to people that broke the law
Hmm.
because of what they did, and Jesus suffered all of that for something that he didn't do. It was
Yeah.
something that he said.
Yeah.
That he said. Yeah.
Yep.
He suffered. Yeah, he suffered all of that.
Yeah. No, I think those are all really good points. Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you guys, I don't know if you guys ever heard of the first half of it, going through all the deities that Jesus could have copied. Um, and that's something that I've actually been hearing a lot of over the past year, looking into different types of kind of like branching myself out and looking into other people's beliefs and religions and all that stuff, which one of them had to be atheism. And that's what I've noticed that a lot of atheists come out with was right away they shut you down is because they're like, no, I don't believe he was real. And these are a lot of the excuses that they give. And to me, I'm kind of wondering, it's like, well, how is that? I don't know how that's possible because have any of them ever looked any of this up? Have they looked up into all the myths before? I mean, to me, I think that they're grabbing a bunch of books that they're being that are being read or being written, and they read them by, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, what is the other one, Christopher Hitchens, and just going through all these people, and they're just repeating what they're saying. That's it. That's the only thing that I can think of, is they're just repeating what's being told to them. And but I as much as I can criticize an atheist for that, the same way I can criticize a Christian for it, because we also don't know why. I don't, I know that most people don't even know this. Like I said, 99% of the Christians I know don't even know this. I've never even heard of any of this before. And it's not any fault of theirs, but I just think that I don't think that we should, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, we shouldn't be scared of looking into any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of Christians are, is that they're scared of looking into this sort of stuff, and kind of exposing themselves to more, outside culture and religions and all this stuff. But, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's mostly what I think about it.
No, I think what you're saying is right, bro. Because I remember when I was younger. Well, I think it's normal that you have a lot of questions. So I remember I would always be the one asking, like, maybe dumb questions, if you want to say that. But I remember people would tell me not to necessarily look into other things, to first just focus on, the Bible or whatever it was. But so I think I just had a lot of questions that kind of, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily answer, but
Right.
But not just that, they would tell me, no, you shouldn't be looking into that. And I think that you're right when you're saying that maybe 99% of believers maybe don't know, like, about what you talked about.
Right.
I think because I had never really heard about those.
Yeah.
When you were talking about them.
Right.
And I thought that was so very, very interesting,
Yeah.
They could say that, at least in my experience, nobody has ever told me that Jesus is a copy. But now I know, if they come and tell me, now I know what you shared today, because it's such good information.
Right.
It is important for believers to kind of know about,
Yeah. No, yeah. No, I know, when I think that's when how apologetics becomes very important. Now, to me, it became how apologetics became very important to me, because it was to be able to have a defense of what you believe in, and have an explanation for what you believe in, and not just saying because the Bible says so or because God did it. I mean, to me, for some people, I guess that's a good enough explanation, but to me, it's not. And I think it can go a lot deeper, and it can go a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I really loved about apologetics, and it's really helped me in really explaining to, I guess, to like a non-believer, about what we believe in. And especially like something like that, it's one thing that I have talked about with atheists before. And the atheists that I have talked to, that's one of the first things that they bring up is Jesus isn't real. But if you've never heard about it before, how are you going to defend it? And to me, that's what I think might be scary for most Christians. Even if they don't think about it, I think because this I guess this movement of non-believers has become so big right now, I think that it's going to come up eventually to a lot of Christians, and a lot of Christians are going to be blindsided by a lot of these questions. And that's where I think that's why I think it's important to go through a lot of this stuff, even if people think that, oh no, like, if I'm going to start studying about it, I'm going to go on into going into their religion or anything like that. But I guess to each their own. To me, it didn't happen. But I can't say that for everybody else. I have known some people that have actually studied and gone the other way. But to me, it's been studying about all this stuff has been has made it very obvious that, you know, they don't have a leg to stand on in any of this. It's totally untrue. And I don't think that we should be scared of it, but I think that we should know a lot of the stuff. And, you know, it's one thing that I think that should be brought up in church, maybe not in a preaching, but I guess like in a small group setting like this. That's why
Yeah.
I appreciate, you know, you guys coming and listening.
I think you should do this group again next year because
No, I want to. I want to. Some of the books that I actually got today are going to go over some of the things I want to talk about next year, starting for next semester. Next semester is going to be pretty good.
no, yeah, I think it's important, like you said, just to become more knowledgeable and I guess more prepared, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
I
think
can
it's
tell you did your
important that facing a fear in religious context is foundational because of for the very fact that it was the fears and people that led to Jesus' crucifixion. It
Mhm.
was that confusion and that inability to resolve it within oneself that they sought out blood from this person. Like they needed him to hurt for them to find resolve. And even then, there was no true resolve. But over these millennia that we've tried to figure out ways of explaining what we find when we look within ourselves, what we find when we look into the universe. There's that tension that it finds us in difficult spaces, and you can't approach that without first approaching your fears.
Mhm.
And this is a really good practice to be able to question something and say, "I'm afraid of this question." Well, let's talk about that. There's good reason to find what source that fear came from, you know? So
Right.
all of this, I mean, amazing practices really can help, also help you relate with others. I noticed that the further that I personally have addressed personal fears, the easier it is for me to relate with somebody and figure out what it is in others that they're afraid of.
No, exactly. I think the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, that I think the exact same thing, because I mean, going through what I've been going through and researching different religions and different things, it's well, I want to see like how these people are thinking, do what they know, do they have good reason to believe in what they believe in? And do I have better reason to believe in what I believe in? And I think that for me has opened up a huge door in being better prepared to evangelize to somebody. Because now I often think that I told different people before the wrong thing. And to me, I guess made me more relatable at the time. But to me now it kind of scares me. It's like, man, like I really said the wrong thing, and I could have said something else. I could have made a bigger impact. And if I knew all this stuff before, I could have changed somebody's life, and I couldn't at that time because I didn't know. I didn't even know if what I believed in was true or not. I didn't at the time. I didn't know who was right and who was wrong. Which is why I really look forward into getting to what we're gonna talk later after the resurrection. What we're gonna be talking about is Islam, Mormonism, and Jehovah's Witness, which I think are the big three. But you know, some things that I have mentioned to them before when I had talked to them, I used to. Well, one thing that I'll share with you guys is I used to be a taxi driver. So one of the things that I met so many different people in a taxi, and I would talk to a lot of them, and some of them they would say like, "Hey, like I would play my own music," and but I wouldn't play anything like you know, like choir music or anything. So I just play something like generic, but it was still like Christian music. And some people would recognize it, and some people would ask me like, "Oh, like, hey, are you Christian?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I am." "Oh yeah, I am too." And to me, I'm like, "Yeah, but you're out here drinking and partying," but all I would just say is like, "Okay, well, what kind of Christian are you? Because I mean, you're out here." And they're like, "Well, I've had some say I'm a Jehovah's Witness, because I don't think Mormons drink at all." But a lot of them that I had were Jehovah's Witness, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, like I'm Jehovah's Witness," and we kind of believe in the same thing. And I was like, "Yeah, we kind of do." I was like, "Well, do you believe in Jesus?" And they're like, "Oh yeah," because I had no idea what they believed in. And I was like, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus." "Oh, okay, cool. Well, do you believe that he, died and rose again, and that he, died for your sin?" "Oh yeah, I believe in the same thing." I was like, "Cool." I was like, that you're out here doing wrong because I mean, you're talking to me about all this stuff. But I was like, but I'm not one to, condemn you or anything. But the only thing that I can tell you is, keep searching for what you're searching for. And, hopefully one day you'll be on the right path and I'll see you in heaven or something. But I was like, but I'm not going to preach to you about what I believe in, because in reality, I don't know who's right and who's wrong. I don't know if you have the right religion. I don't know if I have the right religion, but as long as we're striving for the same thing, I don't see any problem with it. And when they would look at me, I've had a few of them that would kind of tell me the same thing, like, "Didn't you just say that you were apostolic?" And they would be like, the most of the Pentecostal people that I have talked to, the first thing they tell me is that I'm going to hell. And they're like, "You're the only person who wouldn't tell me that." And I was like, "Well, it's because I don't know who's right and who's wrong." And I was like, for all I know, I could be wrong and you're the one that's right. So how can I condemn somebody that I have no idea what they believe in? And they're like, "Man, like, that gets me thinking, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to look more into this stuff." And they're like, "You're a really cool guy. You're one of the most coolest, like, I guess, Pentecostal Christians that I have ever met." And to me, that would make me feel good. But now, after I've done all my research into this, I'm like, "Oh, man, I really think that I messed up and I told them the wrong thing. I should have told them the truth." But before, I didn't know what the truth was. And I was like, I could have really told them the truth, and I really could have, made an impact on their life by telling them what I knew. But, that's one thing that I hope that's gonna show in this next few lessons, is gonna help people talk to people like that, and not be afraid to talk to people like that, and not just kind of like jump around the bush and be like, I don't really know what you believe in, or I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm actually going to bring up scriptures to tell them, these are the scriptures, and this is what we believe in. They have so many different misconceptions about the scriptures, or different parts that they mistranslate, or things to fit in with their own theology that are completely wrong. But we'll get into a lot of that stuff. And it gets really, really interesting, that I think is very, very important.
Is that next lesson?
That's going to be the next, after the next one. So the next lesson after this is going to be the resurrection. And there's so much stuff on just the resurrection. And so, I mean, that was my next part of my journey, was going through the resurrection. And I was the most nervous. I was the most nervous about anything was the resurrection. And that's where I thought I wasn't going to find anything on. And no, the resurrection has to have its own lesson just on that, because of how much that there is.
Awesome.
So yeah, so after the resurrection, then we're going to go through the major top 3 religions that I think are the most important, that we usually come in contact with.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going over it too.